Well, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session, taking a look at the 2026 Association Learning Landscape. If you're an association running a lean team and wondering how to evolve your education program without blowing your budget, you're in the right place. I'm AJ, the CEO of Intuto, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jeff Cobb. Jeff is the co-founder of Tagoras, which is the business and consulting firm behind the leading learning brand and community. Tagoras provides expert market assessment, strategy formulation, and consulting services for organizations involved in lifelong learning, continuing education, and professional development. Leading Learning is a community and resource hub designed to equip learning professionals with tools, insights, and educational content. Through Leading Learning, Tagoras publishes a popular podcast, webinars, newsletters, and publishes major industry reports. Jeff has spent decades advising leaders on how to grow the reach, revenue, and impact of their lifelong learning programs. Tagoras recently published two pivotal reports: the Strategic Outlook for Association Learning Businesses 2026, and a deep dive analysis of 27 association CEOs titled Where Mission and Margin Meet. It's these themes and findings of these reports that we're going to be exploring today. Jeff, thank you for joining us. It's fantastic to have you here.
Thanks so much, AJ. Delighted to be here. I see some familiar faces or familiar names, I guess I should say, in the audience already, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. So you've been such a prolific contributor to the sector through your podcast, online and offline events that you run, articles, publication. And to top it all off, in preparing for our conversation today, I came across a book that you authored titled 10 Ways to Be a Better Learning. So perhaps to kick things off, I'm curious to know, Jeff, in your own life, given how busy you are running Tagoras, what's the one learning habit you refuse to compromise on?
Yeah, thanks. It's funny you found that book. It's an old one, but I think it's mostly held up. I published that after having published Leading the Learning Revolution with a commercial publisher. I decided I wanted to try out self-publishing to see what that was like, just to get a sense of that. And so I put together that 10 Ways to Be a Better Learner off of having written a blog on learning for many years. And so, I think the habit that I took out of that process, that I'm not going to claim I never compromise on, because life is life. But what I aim for is kind of a incremental spaced learning. I think anybody who's in the learning field knows that trying to cram learning, trying to go to just one big event or whatever and expect you're going to learn something just doesn't work. The science tells us it doesn't work. It's that little bit at a time that works the best, to repeat, to practice, to reiterate. So the main place I do that, outside of my life at Tagoras, one of my passions in life is to be a singer-songwriter. And for years now, I've had the practice of getting up in the morning, listening to a couple of songs, usually ones that I've never heard before, or never really paid attention to before. Really trying to learn what I can from those songs, and then spending 10 to 15 minutes doing writing of my own, to develop new material. And that's a process of learning and practicing and applying that I do probably at least 5 out of 7 mornings a week, and have been doing that for years and years at this point, and try my best not to compromise on. And that's how I do it in my particular circumstances in my life. But that kind of practice for anything, not just for songwriting, for anything you want to get good at over time. We're also busy. It can feel impossible to carve out like an hour or two to do something, but 15 to 20 minutes before you start the rest of your day, most of us can get to the point where we can do that if we just really put our minds to it.
Wow, that sounds like a fantastic way to start the day. Myself, I play a bit of guitar, and I haven't got nearly the discipline. In fact, it was just yesterday afternoon. I saw it sort of looking dusty in the corner, and I picked it up the first time in a while, and yes, it was badly out of tune, and got in a bit of practice. But you're starting the day with something like that. It makes really good sense, and it sounds like a lovely, almost meditative way to start the day.
It's nice, and it's something it's the kind of thing that I tell the organizations we work with to encourage their learners and to design their learning in a way that they're going to
Mm,
encourage that kind of engagement with material over time. It's not all about just, the 1 hour course or the 1 hour webinar or the annual meeting. Like, what are these small things you can help your learners do over time in your field, in your industry, that's specific to their lives and their work.
fabulous. Okay, well, let's dive into these reports then. So you've been direct about the fact that the traditional association education revenue model is broken, and you note that many organisations are still trying to be the Netflix of their industry, hoarding these vast libraries of content that nobody watches. In fact, I talked to an association just yesterday. It was in the same situation, 300 odd webinars. And, they're
Mhm.
wanting to move them into our platform. And it's like, well, how many of them are actually still relevant and being accessed? Anyway, why is this library model failing? And what should associations be building instead?
Yeah, we could probably talk all day just on on this particular topic. I mean, mainly people just have so much content, so many choices. Your members, your customers. I mean, they're sifting through just gobs and gobs of stuff. So, to really stand out and have them continually returning to you for a broad array of content, to be the one-stop shop to meet all their needs. I mean, that's a big task to rise to. I mean, it's hard to maintain a large library and do it really well. So if you had 300 webinars and they all happen to be, top notch in terms of, being well designed, hitting learning objectives, really doing something useful for the learners. I mean, let's say that you've managed to do that, which that in itself is an extremely tall order. You still then have to have, the technological capabilities, the marketing capabilities to enable discovery of that content and to get people into that content, to drive conversion, to provide that great experience. If you look, you mentioned Netflix, if you look at what Netflix spends on doing this, they spend somewhere around $20 billion a year annually on creating and acquiring content. They spend about another $3 billion annually on marketing their content, and then they spend about another $3 billion on that on tech R&D for the platform and to provide that, classic Netflix experience that we all know at this
Mm,
point. And I mean, you can scale that down and, and buy affordable systems and, do it at more of an association level, sure. But even when you scale that down, I mean, that's what you would have to actually invest to be able to do that. Is just beyond the reach of even
mm,
the largest associations. I think really can't do that effectively. So the bottom line is you have to narrow your focus. I mean, that's what strategy is all about. How do you get a strategy where you make the trade-offs and you determine, the parts of your audience that most need your education, the types of education those audiences most need, that more narrow set of products and services you can offer that you can rise to the task of delivering extremely well and creating the results that you need for that group of people. One of the things I say about associations and about education that associations provide is you do need to provide learning opportunities for all your members. You need to facilitate a learning community, give people the ability to connect and learn and grow and develop in the field or industry. That does not mean that you have to provide formal educational products for every single segment of the audience that you serve. You have to figure out where you can invest to have the highest return with your formal educational products. And most associations, in my experience, don't do that.
right. So does this tie into your concept of social learning objects then? That sort of generative artifacts that can spark collective learning? Because you talk a bit about that in the reports as well, and that seems to be related to this sort of goldmine of dark content. So You're a small team. So first of all, I'd like you to explain a little bit more about the social learning objects, and then following on from that, how can a small team take that sort of inert content and turn it into these sort of vibrant social learning objects without sort of having to film a whole lot of new video or making a Netflix size investment?
Yeah, it does relate. Social learning object is a phrase I've coined probably 15 years ago or so, maybe 20 years ago, when social media was becoming such a big thing, and there was this sort of just general theory in social media that if you have these social objects that people can focus on, which later is really what memes were like. What is it that people are actually focusing on collectively and talking about? And I mean, not rocket science. I just sort of apply that in the learning world, and it's just very often much more of a effective from any sort of collaboration, coordination perspective. If you want people to learn about something, to meet and to have discussion, for them to have something to focus on is the focal point of that learning. So, how do you, that can be anything. It can be a PDF document. Everybody's read the same document. We actually started doing this years ago, and one of the reasons I got focused on it, we started the Leading Learning podcast really as a social learning object. We were about to hold our first educational event, and we thought we'd like for all of the people coming to the event to have had some exposure to the same content, to the same thinkers, as a way to sort of help facilitate conversation at that event. So if you start to look at, all of that content that you've created as an organization, um, not just as how we're going to create formal learning experiences like courses and classes and conference sessions from it. Certainly there's a place for that, but some of it as much less formal content that is out there for your users to
Mm,
access and provide more of a basis for them to engage around it socially.
mm,
It really, you're giving learners the ability to kind of take ownership of that content and do with it what they will. And a lot of this is just if you got that library of webinars, again, you probably don't want to throw all 300 of them out there and say, hey, here's this stuff, go talk about it.
mm,
Start to curate, start to figure out the ones that really relate to issues that you're seeing pop up in your field or industry right now, because you're always hearing about things, you're seeing it on your listservs or just, talking about it at meetings. Pull out those webinars, or maybe clip out a portion of those webinars, put those up on your website, maybe put them in your LMS, whatever makes most sense, and maybe do some things like provide a discussion guide around a particular webinar that you have recorded. That's the type of thing that AI, for example, can help you do really easily. Go through this transcript and come up with some discussion points that a team at an organization or a group of members might be able to engage with around this particular piece of learning content. That's a great thing, I think, to do with all of that content that organizations have accumulated over time, curate it, and then figure out ways to position it well as social learning objects.
Great, that's fantastic. Thank you. It's well done, by the way. We got through 15 minutes before mentioning AI, so that's not too bad in 2026. I guess somewhat related, but in your 2026 strategic outlook report, it highlights credibility capital as a key differentiator. We know that associations with a small staff base just can't outproduce LinkedIn Learning or Coursera or some of these MOOCs on volume, but they can outtrust them. But how does a smaller organization practically operationalize that trust, and how do they turn that credibility into a tangible product?
Yeah. I mean, this is going to vary obviously from organization to organization, and it may be different depending on the size of the organization. But presumably, any association has a reason for existing in the field or industry that they're in. Even if it's as simple as the people who are going to convene people in that field or industry, you've got something that you were brought into existence to do, and to start really focusing in on that. What is it that you are most essentially in existence for? What is it you are providing to your field or industry that really nobody else is? And again, that may be you know, the ability to bring together the critical players in your field or industry, whether that's at an annual meeting or in other ways. It may be your advocacy efforts. I've talked more and more to organizations where the leaders of their organization are often kind of in the room where it happens, to borrow that, Hamilton terminology from a while back. And based on that sort of deep knowledge they have of how things are evolving in their industry, they're able to,
Mm.
issue reports, stand up webinars, do other things that help to, light the way for the people they're serving. It may be research that your organization produces, but
Mm.
it's basically taking the time to make an inventory of where are we creating these kind of, we refer to them as authority assets. You can
Mm.
think of them as trust assets, but they're the sort of outputs of things that you do as an organization that your competitors just aren't doing, or just really can't do in the same way. And how do you start connecting your educational activities as tightly as possible to those sources of credibility, those sources of trust? If you are in the room where it happens with your advocacy, how do you then, go from there into that webinar, into that course, into even that informal, social learning object that we just talked about, the YouTube video that you're going
Mhm.
to put out that's related to it? If you've got that, annual research report that you're producing that nobody else produces, what are you going to spin out of that that's really going to support it from an educational standpoint? And there's probably some combination of both paid and unpaid, that you might be doing out of that. But so much of this is just really being conscious and intentional as an organization around where your trust and credibility are really flowing from, and how can you bolster that? How can you elevate that? How can you make that as visible as possible and connect your educational experiences
Mm.
into it? Because no commercial provider is going to be able to do that. No individual subject matter expert is going to be able to do that the way that your organization can.
Mm. Yeah, that's very interesting. I guess how do certificates or accreditation tie into then those sorts of assets, authority assets, and how important is that for associations to be able to provide then, say, their members with a certificate or an accreditation? And does it have to be, and how formal does that certificate need to be, or that accreditation need to be? Is their authority alone enough to give that stamp of authority, or not?
I mean, I think it can be very valuable. General rule of thumb, we love for an organization to have some level of credential that it's offering
Mhm.
out in its field or industry. Its ability to do that and how important that's going to be is going to depend both on the organization and the field and industry, obviously. But one of the things we look for when we're working with organizations around their credentials, whether that's certificates or micro credentials or full-blown certification programs, is what what results are those credentials or certifications actually producing for the people who care about them or who should care about them? Because that's going to directly relate to how much trust, credibility, authority is in those credentials or certifications as an asset. And the main thing being, like, for example, if you're issuing a certificate or a credential to somebody in your industry, do employers actually care about that credential
Mhm.
or certificate? Too often organizations have not really, they haven't developed that credential in collaboration with employers to ensure that if somebody earns it, the employer is actually going to look at that in the hiring process or the promoting process and consider it something that's, valid and valuable and that they want to see from their candidates and from their employees. And if the employers don't really care about the credential, then the members aren't going to care about it either. The employees aren't going to care about it because it doesn't really do anything for them. So you have to
Yeah.
have that through line from, here's our credibility, here's what we're authoritative with, here's the education, here's the credential you earn from it, and it actually matters in the employment market where we operate as an organization. If you've got that through line, you're going to be able to sell, whatever that
Mhm.
educational experience and credential are that align with it.
I guess that's where it's important for an association to work with all their stakeholders, including those employers, to bring them on the journey, so to speak, and say, well, we want this to be important for our industry. We think there's a need. Is there a need? And validating that with the employers and then working with them. So taking them along on that journey. And then I guess as well, it's how do you promote those certificates? Can you do that through, I don't know, LinkedIn badges or something that at least is putting it out there, so that other people within the wider industry and network might end up seeing them almost as a billboard, a virtual billboard also is validation that that person's actually ticked that box.
Yeah, I
But it
mean,
was,
you definitely you want them to be visible out there, and for people to start to get the sense that this is something I need to be a part of. We're big. Tagoras, leading learning promoters of just the concept of business development in the education world, and I'll say related to that, I'm on the leadership advisory board of professionals for Association Revenue, PAR. I'll give them a call out, and the reason I'm there is because I believe so firmly that the role of business development related to education is just increasingly important. And by business development, I don't mean selling, or at least not directly selling. Business development is all about developing relationships. And some of the main constituencies that any association needs to develop relationships with is the employers in the marketplace that it serves. That can vary some from depending on the type of association. Maybe there's some other major stakeholder other than the employers, but you need to be developing relationships with those stakeholders because that's going to be a magnet. It's going to be a pull through for your education and for your credentialing. But that takes time. It takes effort. And in my mind, it's often a role for the executive director and the people who are, in charge of education, in charge of meetings, in charge of membership. You need to have these ongoing relationships with those major stakeholders in your marketplace. And I put that under the umbrella of business development.
yeah, and that leads us neatly into talking about capacity, really, because obviously a lot of the associations that you probably work with are very large associations in the US. In New Zealand and Australia, our associations tend to be a lot smaller, and so often
Mhm.
we'll be working with associations that might have a handful, or in some cases even less, of staff on board. And so, just thinking about that capacity, which is clearly something that's raised in your research. A lot of associations struggle with. I suspect even if they do have tens of staff, it's everyone's sort of
Yeah.
struggles with it. And if that's the sort of number one barrier to growth, and everyone wants to do more, but no one has more hours. If you're an executive director with that sort of small staff base, and you're wanting to launch a new education program and you're thinking about accreditation, all these things, what do you stop doing, or how do you architect sort of resourcefulness?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really hard question to answer sort of generically because every organization is so different. And you're right, like even the organizations with tens of staff. I mean, I don't think I've ever met an association that just says we're over-resourced. I mean, everybody's strapped in one way or another. Though I definitely, do feel the pain of very small organizations, in particular. I mean, this is a strategic question, and strategy is always about trade-offs. It's about tough choices you make at kind of a foundational level that then help other choices flow from them. And this may sound contrarian, but the first thing I would ask if an organization wants to launch a new educational program is why. I mean, do you really need that new educational program in the first place? Let's be
Mm,
really clear about, what purpose it's serving in your strategy. What are the outcomes you're going to produce from that? Have you validated in the marketplace with members, with employers, and everybody else that is really needed? So we want to
mm,
check that first. So assuming it is, and that it clearly, serves your purposes as an organization, more than what you already have in place, then you do have to take a hard look at what you already have in place. Because if you are that
mm,
organization with an executive director and staff of three people, they're just logical limits to what you can add. Something's going to have to go, or something's going to have to be pared back. So, stepping back and saying, here's what we're really trying to do as an organization, who we're really trying to serve with our investments in formal education, uh, and what we're trying to achieve there. And based on that, these are the most important things for us to be doing right now. And other things are going to have to, maybe they do start to fall more in that, informal learning bucket, where you are thinking through how do we provide some resources out there that aren't as formal,
Mm.
don't require as much of an investment on our part, but will still provide members and other stakeholders with learning opportunities, and we're going to provide some support for those sort of social learning opportunities, but we're really going to invest our main resources in a smaller set of formal opportunities. And I would say, if I'm a small organization that, executive director with, say, 3 staff, I'm going to make the assumption you can't have all of those staff, focusing completely on education. You got other things that people have to do. But I would want at least, one of those staff people to be truly excellent at identifying and managing the best subject matter experts in your audience, and supporting them well and being great presenters and facilitators. I'd want somebody else to have at least part of their time focused on, purely on just really doing the logistics that are required around delivery of education really well, whether that's digital education, live education, digitally or face to face, whatever it is. Somebody really focused on that, and then I would want that executive director, as we were just talking about, focused on business development. If
Yeah.
you're going to build those programs, how are you going to make sure that that demand is there and that you're going to get the leverage with those programs that you want to?
Mm. And partnerships play a role then. Have you seen any good examples of where maybe smaller associations or actually larger ones, but where resources and capacity is sort of raised as a big problem and a barrier? Have you seen partnerships that have worked well, and some examples of that, or are there any pitfalls that associations should be wary of?
Yeah, I think partnerships can really, provide significant leverage to organizations of any size, and I think they're often not taken advantage of to the degree that they could be. That's something else that I put under that sort of business development umbrella, developing those good partnerships that serve really clear needs for the organization's strategy, for providing that member value that you're trying to provide. We just had a webinar about partnerships within the last week or so. So I have that fresh in mind. The Mortgage Bankers Association was on that call. They are a large association, but there's nothing they were doing that was because they are a large association. Their members needed AI training. They were not in a position to deliver AI training. It's not their competency, even though they're a huge organization. They don't need to get into AI training. So they partnered around that and had some very specific criteria for how they were going to work with that partner to deliver the type of AI training. They partner with somebody around leadership coaching. Again, they're a big organization, but that's not a competency of theirs. And so they partnered with somebody to do that. They've partnered with, in their case, with universities to get some of what they have created. They do have some credentials. They have, education they've created, to get some of that actually embedded in some university programs that help to feed people into their industry. That may be a little bit on the sort of medium to larger size organization type of initiative. But there are ways to think about that, even with smaller institutions. Who might you partner with in whether it's your region or your locality, where what you have in terms of expertise and content, they could be a channel for getting out to the types of people you're trying to reach, when you can't be the channel all the time. You can partner to find other ways to
Mm,
reach the people you're trying to reach.
great insights. Yes, well, okay. You've raised AI twice now. Mentioned it in passing. Now, of course, there's a lot of AI anxiety out there at the moment, and it was interesting. Your data shows that 40% of associations are talking about it, but have no plan. The
Mhm.
smaller associations, what should their goal be to build an AI strategy? Do they need one, or is it just to use AI tools to speed up the sort of the grunt work? And then where is the low hanging fruit and how they might be able to leverage AI within their administrative work or indeed business
Yeah.
development tool.
Yeah. I think for me, like whether you have an AI strategy, I'm not sure I even think in terms of like of having an AI strategy per se. I think first
Mm,
and foremost of having a strategy. And if you have a strategy in place for your organization and in place with what you're trying to do with education as a way of providing value to your members and to the field or industry you serve, then you can look at where would adding AI to that give us some leverage? Where would it make where would it make it more possible for us to create what we need to create, to distribute what we need to distribute, to know what we need to know in order to execute on this strategy? So AI should be integrated with strategy. I don't know that a smaller organization in particular needs a dedicated AI strategy per se. Now, that said, I mean, I think any organization, no matter how small or large you are at this point, should certainly be making use of AI tools and getting comfortable with them, making them a part of the workflow. I mean, strategy aside, just sheer productivity, if you're able to make decent use of AI tools, you're going to be able to be more productive as an individual and as a staff. I think even the smallest of organizations, unless you're just so completely cash strapped that you can't do this, which means you have much bigger problems than we're discussing here, should have paid AI accounts for its staff. So the $20 a month, $240 a year in most instances for somebody to have access to the latest models and be able to use them well. I mean, there's no way you're not going to get a good return off of that. If you think about, let's say an employee costs, $50,000 a year, just use a clean round number. If using AI increases their productivity by even 1%, you've more than doubled your investment in giving them a paid AI subscription for the month. So this is the time where people have to be hands-on, have to be experimenting. I mean, I don't necessarily buy into the sort of the fear and hype that are out there right now that, if you're not jumping on the bandwagon and creating, AI-driven learning experiences immediately, you're going to be left behind and no longer be relevant. I think nothing's that clear. But I do believe, we all have to be getting comfortable with it right now, incorporating it into our work and figuring out what those leverage points might be for AI in our strategies. How are we going to be able to amplify our strategies and possibly be able to achieve our goals faster, better than we would have without AI?
mm, fantastic. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm as a bit of a geek myself. I'm just sort of always using different tools and playing around with different things. And so, just to satisfy my curiosity, are there any tools in particular that you use? I know that they're coming as new ones every day, but tools that you specifically use in your business that you've found being particularly successful, or that you see associations are leveraging more than others? Any that you want to mention?
I don't know that I'm doing anything particularly unusual in my AI usage. Out of the core kind of generative AI tools, ChatGPT has been the one that I've focused on the most. I dabble around with other things, but I don't want to get too diffuse in what I'm doing. I'd rather really learn how to get the most out of something like ChatGPT than be using 10 different things and maybe not getting so much out of them. The main thing for me is to always be conscious of and thinking about where could this tool potentially be of help to me? How could this tool
Mm,
potentially be of help to me? Because it's easy to overlook. I've found that I'll be doing something and I'll realize, oh, I could have asked chat for help on that, and I probably would have done an hour ago if I did. Um, and then really, really, the thing I've found with AI tools, and I'm certainly not alone in saying this, is learning how to really articulate your questions, learning how to keep probing and be persistent in what you're asking and asking for different takes on things. I mean, I'm from the South in the United States. We tend to be very polite here, and you don't, keep asking somebody the same question again and again. But you can do that with chat, and you should.
Mm.
Come at it from a lot of different perspectives and ask it to redo things. Um, and and I found again and again that even though hallucinating isn't quite the problem that it was earlier on, you still have to be very, very careful with the output that you're getting and making sure that things aren't sneaking in that just aren't quite right. So there's a discipline and a diligence that I think will always go with it, but certainly is still required very much right now.
Right. Thank you. Well, I want to ask you one final question before we get to the questions that are coming through the chat. So, what is the one trend in the association space right now that you wish would just go away? Buzzword or a strategy that you think's more of a distraction than anything?
Yeah, this is there are probably quite a few out there, but the one that's been on my mind recently, and I always hesitate to say this because in many ways, I'm very involved in sort of promoting a focus on this, but I also think it may create more problems than it solves, and that's non-dues revenue. I don't like the phrase non-dues revenue. Um,
Mhm.
I think it creates kind of a bifurcation in how we think about member value. Um, and membership in and of itself is a business model. It's not the reason for an organization to exist. And I think sort of non-dues sort of automatically you get the sense that what's labeled non-dues is sort of lesser than dues revenue. And it also, you have people thinking about how do we do the non-dues thing and how do we do the dues thing? And those shouldn't be separate. It should all be about, delivering member value, delivering the great experience that you want to deliver to your members and to the field or industry you serve. So I wrestle with that one, and I think I would prefer it not even be a term.
That's really interesting that you say that because, like you, we've had a little bit to do with the PAR organisation, and in fact, Jay attended their conference last year, and we had a couple of panel discussions that included a number of different associations and related people and people from PAR on panels in December and in January, and that came up as one of the number one thing actually was stop calling it non-dues revenue.
Oh yeah.
Reframe it entirely. Think about innovation funding, mission fuel.
Hmm.
It sounds too much like it's the output when really revenue is the input and the output is mission impact and this whole idea of community partnership entities as well. So, yeah, rather than thinking of it as particularly professional ecosystems as sort of piggy banks, looking at them as more of partnerships. So, look, that's really interesting that you bring that up. Okay, so look, I think we've got a few questions that have come through. So, just being conscious of the time, we might sort of address those now.
Yeah.
Caitlin, did you
Sure.
want to kick off with some questions?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Jeff and AJ, for that discussion so far. We do have a few questions that have come through in the chat. I might end up going from most recent to the earlier ones in that order because I think this first question, which was actually the last question, you don't
Yeah.
like the term non-dues revenue. Any thoughts about a term you'd like to see used instead?
In the learning world decades ago, there was always this debate about e-learning. Why are we calling it e-learning? Shouldn't it just be learning? And it took two decades for the e-learning guild to finally change its name to the Learning Guild and to get rid of the e. And the thought back in the day is eventually it's all learning. Why don't we just call it learning? Why are we making this distinction on the e? I would say the same thing about non-dues revenue. It's all revenue. Why are we making this non-dues distinction? I don't think it requires a separate term. You mentioned PAR professionals for association revenue. It's not professionals for association non-dues revenue. It's professionals for association revenue. It's the revenue, and whether it's coming from membership or whether it's coming from sponsorships or sales of education or whatever the case might be, it's all that mission fuel, and it all needs to be aligned to delivering value for the members you're serving.
Absolutely. That actually brings us quite nicely into another question we've got here. Based on your experience with associations, are there any areas that you commonly find where there are missed opportunities for education and revenue? In other words, low-hanging fruit that you'd want to identify in initial engagement?
We find almost universally that organizations are not, they're either not doing anything with, or they're not being sort of as intentional and focused on business to business selling as they are to, selling to individual members. So how do you put together opportunities that are going to be attractive to institutional buyers of your education, so that they're putting many people through? It's so much easier to sell 10 or 100 or 500 registrations at a time, or subscriptions, even better, than it is to sell them one at a time. Subscription type models also, we're also just seeing a lot of growth there. I was interviewing Michael Tatanetti of Pricing for Associations earlier today for a podcast interview. He's seeing the same thing, that really looking at that body of content you have. I mean, this is another approach to the 300 webinars. If you put them under a subscription model, assuming that that they are good content that people actually do want to access, or at least most of it is, you can, particularly for the stuff that you're never really going to sell anyway, if it helps to drive subscription purchases, that can be an immediate move. Again, depends on the organization. If you don't have a body of content large enough to do that, then you're not going to be able to do that. But I'd say business to business selling and subscriptions, like right off the bat. And then very often there are opportunities for creating some form of credential if you don't already have one, or some additional form of credential that can potentially lead to new revenue as well.
Awesome. This next question, AJ, you'll probably have a little bit to add to this as well. So Jeff, earlier on you mentioned the mortgage bankers that you had in a webinar, I think you said was last week, and how they partnered for topics that are outside of the area of expertise. Do you have any tips on how to identify those areas in education, and how to avoid subject matter that's not really an area members will actually want to get from your association?
Well, I think a lot of this tracks back to that concept we were talking about around credibility capital. I mean, they're just, presumably as an organization, you're going to have those areas that you really exist for. Like this is why you're here. I mean, for your average organization, it's not Excel training, it's not AI training. I mean, and if you don't know, your members will tell you. Ask them. This is what we trust you for the most. And anything that falls outside of that is an opportunity for partnership. And it may be that even within your stakeholder base, your members, the vendors in your community, if you're a trade association, some of the companies that are part of your organization, they may actually be the right partners for delivering some of that training. So definitely look within your sphere as an organization. But yeah, I mean, if you can't trace your credibility or trust to what you're providing, then you shouldn't be providing it.
And just to add to that, I mean, we went down the path ourselves a few years back of exploring the concept of producing almost like an academy of business skill courses and all the rest of it that we could take to associations as part of our offering at Intuto. And it became very apparent talking to some of the early association executives that we discussed the idea with. It's like, well, why would we invest the time and money going down that path and presenting that content ourselves, when we know that there's LinkedIn Learning and there's 1,000 other places that people can get that content? They really wanted to be the destination for that unique content that only they can provide, and that really ties into their credibility capital. So we've seen that firsthand.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Cool. Next question then. Kind of on that topic, I guess. Are there ways to actually identify the areas where an association has earned more trust with its members?
Um, I mean, I would go back to what I just said, is asking the members to get their input on that. But then, I mean, it's really just what we describe as listening. We have a tool we call the Market Insight Matrix, which and that's free. Anybody can find it if you just search on Tagoras Market Insight Matrix. And there are different ways of looking at your market. Asking is one of them. Listening is one of them. And listening, from that, we don't literally mean listening most of the time. It's really kind of observing. So, how are you being talked about out there? What shows up in the press when you get referenced by anybody? What do you get referenced for? If somebody says something about you on social media, what are they saying? What are the most accessed pages on your website? Everybody hopefully has Google Analytics hooked up to their website and can see, what are the pages people are coming to. Everybody hopefully also has something called Search Console from Google hooked up to your website, and you can see the searches that people are making that lead them to you. Those are the areas where you're almost certainly going to be identified with, trust and credibility and authority. And those can change over time somewhat, but if you've been around as an organization for any period of time, you'll be able to track that data and see pretty clearly, here's how we're perceived. Now, you do want to ask a question as an organization. Is that how we intended to be perceived? Is that what we were actually started as an organization to do? Where should we have trust and authority and credibility? And this is part of what I mean by being kind of conscious and intentional about that, because you may find in this process that you're not actually being valued in the way that you thought you could and should be valued as an organization in the field or industry that you're serving. And you either need to go with what you are valued for, or you need to change that and realign that perception of trust and credibility, which of course is not an overnight process to do.
Mhm.
Definitely. Now that you've mentioned a couple of those tools that you were using in that question as well, we do have another question here that's a little bit more about different AI tools and how to make sure they remain secure and protected. Is a private ChatGPT account enough to keep your webinar content confidential enough, or would you recommend other tools to keep your material private and secure?
Um, I'm not sure if I totally understand the question. If it's, if you're, I'm assuming maybe you're using it to generate or to do transcripts or analyze your content from your webinar. I would say I will not claim to be an AI expert. I'm not a tech person per se, even though we know learning technology quite well. But I think it will come down to what is enough for your organization. I think for your average organization, if you have, checked the boxes to not be sharing your data publicly with the model that's behind ChatGPT, my suspicion is that probably is enough for 80 to 90% of organizations. Now, if you're actually dealing with things that have some security, privacy type aspects to them, then yeah, you probably don't want to be using an open large language model. You want to have that on your own servers in your own private model.
AJ, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd agree with Jeff. I think really the technology is moving so fast that you almost do need to think about a bit of an audit, a privacy audit of your data in that respect. Probably thinking about, how secure should this information be. You like to think that all of these models, all your data is safe, just in the same way that if you put everything up on OneDrive or Google Drive, you hope that it's all safe and secure, and it will be to a certain extent. How quickly the technology is moving, you can never be completely sure, and unless you have everything siloed off, unconnected, not connected to the internet, then it's probably at some sort of risk. In terms of from a content creation perspective, I think what we're seeing is I don't know the stats, but I would be astonished if there's not been a massive drop off in the number of blogs being published just because so much of that content can be AI based now.
Mhm.
And I think really it's coming down to these sorts of conversations. It's going back to the person to person or small group discussions that really have the value and authenticity that associations and members can lean on. So I would say outside of really private conversations, you probably want to do your best to have authentic conversations and promote them as much as possible. Forget about hiding them behind a model. Get them out.
Yeah.
Cool. And then maybe this could be our last question before we kind of move on to the end of everything we've got to say. If you were a new executive director of an association, what's the first area you'd want to look at when it comes to education and opportunities for revenue?
Um, this will sound boring, but I think it doesn't happen enough with education. Is I would want to do a very detailed financial analysis of it. And I say this because we often come into organizations and there's not a clear sort of profit and loss on even a product line by product line basis, much less a product by product basis. So organizations will typically know what they're spending, on the LMS and whatever else in terms of direct cost. They'll know that. They'll know their direct cost, but there are often any number of indirect costs, and in particular staff cost that they're not really accounting for on like a product line by product line basis. So you don't really know what's profitable and what's not. And then I would also want to know clearly, as part of that sort of profitability analysis, what are the registrations or enrollments? Like, what are the usage numbers on a product line by product line or product by product basis? And what's our estimation of what they should be? If we're looking at, the audience we're serving, how large it is, what this particular topic is, are we hitting numbers anywhere close to that for our actual registrations and enrollments? And when we go in and work with organizations, oftentimes, they don't really have that profitability on a product line basis. And they have enrollment or registration numbers that are way off from what they realistically could or should be if there were the focus on how do we articulate, communicate the value for that particular product line and drive the people into it. There's just not that level of focus on the individual products. And by the time you do that, you start to see, okay, well, this product is clearly profitable and it has much more potential than we're realizing right now. That is a place to invest like crazy. This product is not profitable. It actually seems to be reaching about all the people that we can reach with it. We either need to decide that we're killing it, or maybe there's some reason that it's so mission critical that we'll continue to subsidize it, but we're going to make a conscious choice to do that. Like, we know we're doing that. It's not just sort of slipping in there when it shouldn't be. So that's something I would look at around education coming in.
Fantastic. Look, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation, and we are just about out of time now. So, before we let you go, Jeff, where's the best place for people to follow your latest work and connect with you?
Yeah, we publish most prolifically on the Leading Learning site. So that's leadinglearning.com. And there we have the podcast. It used to be weekly. It's now coming out every other week, but we're getting close to 500 episodes there. So we certainly encourage folks you can search on the site and find, a podcast addressing just about any aspect of learning and education. I've obviously focused a lot on the sort of business side of things here, which I did in that response I just gave. But we're all about impact too. Like, what is the quality of the learning? Are you actually moving the dial with your learners? And we talk a lot about that. But we do regular webinars. We have events like our annual virtual conference. So all of that you can get on leadinglearning.com.
Great, thank you. Well, Jeff, thank you again for sharing your perspectives and research with us today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you haven't already, please go and subscribe to our newsletter from our website. Follow us on LinkedIn to get notified of other in-depth conversations that we have coming up later this year. We do have another webinar that we're going to be involved in next week, which is we're guests on the CIO Hour, and we'll be talking there about gold and their content. The AI tech stack to turn hidden assets into member education gold mites. So if you're interested, please go on to CIO, our website, and come along, join that conversation. Otherwise, we'll be doing this again towards the end of March, and those details will be coming out within the next week. Thank you all very much for being here today, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.